Ed Kemper is a pretty interesting film, and for the most part, I enjoyed this. It's not necessarily the most sensitive. Obviously, when you're dealing with a serial killer, and all things considered, a serial killer who was operating not that many years ago, this was in the 70s, so obviously a lot of people affected are still going to be alive today, their families, their friends. It's not as sensitive as perhaps some other serial killer-based films. But as long as that's not the kind of film you're looking for, I think it still helps to raise awareness. It still looks at the character, maybe not the deepest analysis of the character's actions and motivations, but it's still raising awareness of those who are affected, and ultimately, it's a decent film. This was released in 2025. It's directed by Chad Ferrin, and it's written by Ferrin and Stephen Johnston, with a cast including Brandon Kirk as Kemper. And I do think he looks the part. The performance was fantastic. I'm not a huge expert on Kemper. I've read quite a bit about Kemper, but I've not seen a lot about Kemper. I wasn't really sure what I was expecting in terms of how the character presented himself, how he walked, how he spoke. I didn't have any expectations there, so that's worth bearing in mind. You may be looking for something different, maybe arguably more realistic, but certainly for me, I didn't have any problems with believing that this was the character. And it's all about his life and the killings, and it's done in a way that doesn't sugarcoat anything at all. And again, some of that could be argued as insensitive and disrespectful because this was not a tremendously long time ago. In the grand scheme of things, it was about 50 years ago, and loved ones of those affected certainly, I would say, should not watch this. Because I'm not saying it sides with Kemper, it absolutely does not, but there are things that are not sugar-coated. We have close-ups of blood, and it's very easy to feel like we're there and seeing things from Kemper's perspective. And obviously that's, again, a little bit insensitive, particularly when it's taking those acts, those killings, and presenting them in a way that's entertaining. And obviously that's quite difficult to sit with because these were real people affected by this, real people whose lives were lost in very traumatic ways, and those moments are, in the film, entertaining moments insofar as they're dramatic, they're suspenseful, they don't hold anything back, we definitely see quite a lot, and if I were connected to somebody who was actually affected by that, I wouldn't be happy with the way that that's presented in the film, so that's worth bearing in mind. But just as a film on its own, I think it did a good job of telling the story in a way that's very engaging. But again, if somebody were to argue it's maybe too soon for this kind of approach, I could understand that. So I'm kind of on the fence with how I should feel about this, because on the one hand, it was engaging, it was suspenseful, it was dramatic. In terms of the viewing experience, I think it worked well that it didn't sugarcoat anything. It was shocking. It was very disturbing at times. But on the flip side, it doesn't necessarily offer anything of value against Kemper. And it is basically just following Kemper with his killings from his perspective, which, yes, again, from an entertainment perspective, is very, very interesting. But if I were connected to somebody whose life had been taken by Kemper, I may be a little uneasy with that approach. So as a film, it is solid, it is disturbing, it is suspenseful. Kemper as a character in the film is very interesting. Do I think they took the right approach? I think it's maybe too soon. Had they taken a different angle, had it shown Kemper in more, well, further down the line, let's say, later on in his life, had it shown him later on in his life, maybe as a kind of reflection, Kemper in present day, reflecting on things and not glorifying the killings, I think that would have been a better approach. They could have achieved the same thing, but it could have been done in a way that was maybe a little bit more sensitive to the victims and the families and friends of those affected. So, on the one hand, I think they did a really great job. Visually, it's very good with strong lighting and camera work, great use of sound, really adding to the suspense, some good costumes. It does have a 70s feel to it. And if it were a work of fiction, it would be absolutely fantastic. It's powerful, it's suspenseful, it doesn't sugarcoat things. Following from Kemper's perspective is a really interesting angle. But because it's based on truth, it's either too soon or I think they needed to take a slightly different approach. But all of that being said, I recommend it. But just bear in mind that it won't be for everybody. It's not an easy watch. On the one hand, that's because they did a lot of things right in terms of presenting an entertaining film. But on the flip side, I'll say it again, it maybe feels a little insensitive because it's a little bit too soon. I know 50-something years seems like a long time. But if there are people still alive who were affected, who knew the victims, related to the victims at the time, I wouldn't want them to watch this. And for me, that feels uneasy and makes me question whether this was the right approach at this time. Ultimately, if you're curious, check it out, come to your own conclusion, let me know what you think. There were many aspects that I enjoyed, but I still have a giant question mark over this one.